Good afternoon. I'm going to officially call our meeting to order. So welcome. Welcome everybody to our AOI's October meeting. For those of you who I have not met, my name is Cindy Gwelly, and I am president of AOI this year. I know, this is a good group. When everybody keeps talking, it's a very good group. So thank you for that. Thanks for that. I'm going to be probably a letdown after that when you have to hear me talk. But again, for those of you who I have not met, my name is Cindy Gwelly, and I'm president of AOI this year. And so welcome to all of our guests, to our speaker, and thank you for coming out. I know that this is always a very busy time of year, so the fact that you made the time to be here with us, we really do appreciate. And I think community is so important right now, particularly in this year. It's always important, but particularly in this year. So we're very grateful that you're here with us. And we have a recording of our September meeting. That was with Carol Schwartz. That is on our website and on our YouTube channel, and we are going to use that as a record that we're going to keep, our official record of that AOI meeting in September. If you did not get a chance to see that, it is worthwhile to see. Carol was a great speaker, and she is exactly as you would want Carol to be. Carol is very Carol. And so it is very fun to go back and take a look at that. We do have some new members to welcome today. So I'm going to turn that over to Carolyn, I think, to go through our new members, and then we can vote them in. Yes, and Carol Schwartz. So yes, we wrangled her in to become a member.
Oh, wow. I know. I tried to get Linda Kropp to join, but she said she was leaving it up to the next generation. So we have Donna. I think we introduced Donna last month, or maybe is Donna here?
Well, we'll introduce her again.
Okay.
We'll
introduce
vote on
her again.
We'll make
Donna,
it double official.
I was trying to avoid having to pronounce her name.
Hanusik, I believe.
Donna Hanusik. And Mark Allen Noon, who is here, and he just joined. And Mark, do you want to just briefly tell us something about yourself?
Thank you. Hi, my name is Mark Noon, Mark Allen Noon. I was born and raised in D.C. I'm a very proud D.C. native. Graduated from Gonzaga in 1973. Are there any Gonzaga grads? All right. Is there any St. John's grads? All right, there'll be a fight out back later on in the... All right. But I'm very happy to be here. Delighted to be a member here. I'm also a very proud friend of Dr. Corrigan, who's going to be speaking today. So, but thanks, everybody. And once again, I'm happy to be a new member. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark.
Thank you for joining and welcome. And today, Cynthia Sheeran. Yep, that would be you. Because you joined today. We didn't have time.
Okay, I did just join today. Thanks to Winfield Swanson, who introduced me to this group. Let's see, I have lived in the area since I was 4, but in D.C. proper since 2002. I am thrilled to be a D.C. resident. I'm currently very troubled by what's going on in our city. I hope everybody here is going to protest on Saturday. And yeah, glad to be part of this organization.
Welcome. And Susan Rao and Firoz Rao were not able to be here today, and Pat Bitundo invited them to join. Susan Rao and Firoz Rao. Did I pronounce their name? Yes. So thank you. They weren't able to be here, but hopefully in November they'll be
Wonderful. Thanks. Can we, I think that's it, right?
That's
the
all
rest
for
of
the
it?
new members.
Can we, yay or nay, voting them all in very simply? All those in favor, yay?
Yay.
Any nays? No. Good. That's good. All right. Well, welcome. Welcome, Mark, and welcome, Cynthia, while you were here. Thank you for joining.
Okay.
And while you hopefully have joined and are going to be coming back, I want to make sure that everybody has noted that we now on our website have a skip the line option if you're going to RSVP for the lunches. So if you go to our website and you go over to if you go for events, you'll see at the bottom when you're RSVPing for the lunch, you can pay for your lunch, skip the line, we'll have your name tag and your choice of food, and you can just pick it up and grab a seat. And although we would love to say hello to you at that table, please do stop by. You are not going to have to wait in line. So if you would like to do that, please note that we now have that. I am going to turn it over to Anna Fierst, who's going to tell us about something that we have offered at the back of the room.
Thank you for that little introduction. So Judy Hubbard is a long-term member, and I'm a little newer member, but we are officers at the National Women's Foundation. And I want to say Pamela Johnson, who is president of the NWF, I had this brilliant idea of creating a planner, desk planner, based around the life and allies of Eleanor Roosevelt. So each week has a picture, quotes. It is masterfully designed and is based on a previous planner we did. So we didn't have design hiccups. It was more the research. And this is particularly meaningful to me because it is about my great-grandmother. So I am thrilled that we are able to launch this today. This is one of our first launches. And Judy and I will be selling it at the table after the event.
Excellent.
Yeah. Yes, absolutely. Thank you. Did Pamela plant that question to you?
I thought maybe that would be good.
Yeah, we'll give you a bulk discount. I mean, we'll have to talk about that. Okay. All right. Thank you so much. Yes. Yes, we have a square back there. So we're all set up for any kind of transaction like that. Okay, we'll see you afterwards. Bye-bye.
And at $20, it already is a really good. Right. We have, if you have, that's what I was just going to say. Exactly. That Bill is saying that if you have not had a chance to, if you were not here and you wanted to hear Anna's talk that she gave to AOI last year, we do have that on our website and on our YouTube channel. So that is recorded. Highly recommended. And we thank you again for coming to talk. So. It was one of our favorite presentations that we had. So, and if you want to watch it again, you can watch it over and over, which is great. Thank you. We do also have an award to note that I want to give out today, and this is going to be a certificate of appreciation. This is for the Military Road School Preservation Trust, which had its 30th anniversary this past Saturday. If you are not familiar with the Military Road School, the trust itself was created to preserve the history of the school and the spirit of the school. The school itself was established in 1864, so it predates AOI by 1 year, which is towards the end of the Civil War, and it was specifically founded to educate free people of color. And it was founded right on the edge of Fort Stevens, on the barracks of Fort Stevens, because that is where a number of the community of free, what had been formerly enslaved people and free people of color were coming for help, for community, for education, and for jobs. And so they founded the school right there by Fort Stevens. For many years of its existence, it was the only school that was available to black students in Northwest DC, and so it became a hub for community as well as for the students that were there. It was closed in 1954 after the Brown decision and desegregation in public schools took place here in Washington, and it was designated a historic landmark. It is going to be the subject of our February luncheon. So we have Teresa Saxon, our board member, who is going to be giving us a presentation on that, as well as having a panel discussion with some of the alumni from the Military Road Road School. So we would like to honor and acknowledge the work, not only the history of the school, but the work that Teresa and our other board member, Pat Tyson, as well as several other members here at AOI and at the Trust have put into preserving this history that really would have been lost had they not stepped up to make sure that not only the building was preserved, but the oral histories and the memory and its place in DC history had been preserved. So I have a certificate that I will be presenting to Pat after, but I want to acknowledge Pat and the Trust. So thank you. Thank you for, and happy anniversary to the alumni group. Thank you for that. And speaking of anniversaries, AOI is turning 160 in December. And as most of you know, we have been looking back at our own history and talking about some of our founding members. And so far, we have talked about this group of guys. So we've talked about Taylor, Bradley, Forrest, Kalen, and Brent. And this is most of the original officers of AOI at their foundings. Bill has kindly put these talks that we've had also on YouTube, so if you have missed any of them, you can catch them on our website as well as on YouTube. We are trying to make it so easy for you to find us everywhere. Social media, YouTube, you can find us online. Today, we're going to be talking about Dr. Alexander McDonald Davis, and he was the first recording secretary of AOI. Had it been up to Dr. Davis, AOI would not be called AOI. It would have been called the Columbus Association, which was his recommendation at the very first meeting. He wasn't quite as fond of the name Oldest Inhabitants. But Benjamin Taylor, who was president, kind of shouted him down and said, "Hey, I'm proud to be one of the oldest inhabitants." And so Davis backed down. He said to show that old men were not querulous, he would withdraw the suggestion. And I'd like to note that he was 56 at that time when he was calling himself and the rest of them old men for that. He was born in Baltimore, actually, in 1808. He didn't come to D.C. until 1830. And he went back and forth between Washington and Baltimore until he settled in D.C. for good after he married Martha Kelso from Baltimore. They lived where the arrow is on the bottom of the slide, on this row of townhouses on E Street, E and 7th, in downtown, in Penn Quarter. Some of these buildings actually still exist. I believe the building next to his does not, but I believe the building next to him is a Sweet Green, and the building next to that is a Luke's Lobster Roll. So you can actually still go and look at this section and what was left of it. It's right around the corner from the Clara Barton missing persons office on 7th. He was related, his brother is Reverend Charles Davis, who was a noted Methodist priest and sometime government clerk. He was a Navy chaplain at the outbreak of the Civil War. And he was expelled from the Southern Conference of the church for remaining in the Union. But when he died in 1867, he had become the chaplain at the Norfolk Naval Hospital, so he did manage to get back down south. Dr. Davis died unexpectedly at the age of 63, we believe from a stroke. He had sent one of his servants to go to the market to get him some strawberries, and by the time she came back, he was dead in his bed. So this was quite unexpected for him. His wife, Martha, had been visiting his son, Jack, who at that point was an Army instructor in New York, but he did become a brigadier general before he retired. He spent his career in the Navy. And Jack, by the way, graduate of Gonzaga High School. So you're looking for graduates? That's Jack. He's got your back there. We don't have I haven't been able to find a picture of Dr. Davis, but we have an idea of what maybe he looks like by seeing a picture of his son and a picture of his brother. So you can kind of envision what he might have looked like. You can see from his obituary on the left that they did close the government in consequence for his memorial service. So he was important to DC as well. And he was important in kind of two ways. He had two parts to his career. The first one was healthcare, as well, and public health, as well as becoming involved with local politics. So during the cholera epidemic in 1932, he came to Washington and he worked to treat patients who were suffering from cholera. He worked with Dr. Joseph Burroughs at that time. There was a report that was published in the paper that is in the middle there of his going to treat a man who was suffering from the symptoms of cholera, who then did die, and he listed them because every person who was dying, they wanted to know what the symptoms were and how long it took them to die, and this was part of the public health service. You could die within a matter of hours after you started to show symptoms, mostly from dehydration. You'd go into septic shock, and you died. They didn't know exactly what cholera came from, how cholera was spread until the 1850s. So if you see on the upper left, there are notices of how to avoid cholera that were passed around D.C. and a resolution by the D.C. government to stay away from certain fruits and vegetables. And they listed all of them there: peas, potatoes, cabbages, and they weren't sure. They thought it came from the air. It did actually come from the water. So even though their theory was wrong, the practice was actually not bad. It did help to prevent the spread of that. Dr. Davis became a well-known figure because of that and because of his involvement in things such as the Orphans Asylum and Girls' School, that he ended up running for local office. So he served as an alderman, he served as a council member, he served as president of the council, and he did run for mayor. And while he was president of the council, he pushed through a resolution to be able to build a bridge at K Street, at the end of K Street, going over Rock Creek so that it could connect Georgetown to the downtown area. So this is a photo of, this was in the 1850s that they passed that. So they did build a bridge. This is another bridge that replaced it in 1907 that you can see here on the right, and the arrow points to the bridge. But you can still see in 1907 how rural it was still, I think, to this connection from during. So you can imagine 50 years before that, what that crossing might have looked like for him. So the other part of his career was in national politics. And it's always a little scary picture when you put up Henry Clay there. Sorry about that. That's after lunch, right? It's a little shocking as it comes there. So he joined the Whig Party, which was prominent in D.C., not just in politics at that time. It was part of the main parties of the two-party system with the Democratic Party, but with AOI members. So as you look at the list of people who belong to the Whigs of Washington, you see Joseph Bradley, you see Dr. Magruder, and you see them time and time again in all of these major political organizations, including the Clay clubs, which were supporting Henry Clay for president when he was running for president. So he not only served on these committees, but he became an officer in these committees as well. So he was absolutely well thought of. If you're not, I won't go into a whole long talk about what the Whigs were, but I think it's important to note that at its very basic level, they were opponents of Andrew Jackson, and they were opponents of what they called the executive tyranny of people like Andrew Jackson as president in the White House. So they were. That was one of the issues for the Whig Party. Henry Clay didn't get the nomination. The nomination went to William Henry Harrison. That's on the bottom right here. So Dr. Davis put his support behind him, joined the inaugural committee to both plan the inauguration party as well as the parade. And this is the first time citizens formed a committee to form an inauguration for a presidential inauguration. It didn't go so well, I'm sure you know, for William Henry Harrison. After the inauguration was all downhill. He died 35 days later in the White House, shortest presidential term that was on there. It was not because of Dr. Davis and his planning of the inauguration. And it was not, as many people have talked about over the years, because it was cold that day and he talked for 2 hours in his the longest inaugural address ever. And he was one of the oldest presidents we've ever had. He wanted to look young, so he didn't wear a coat, didn't wear a hat, didn't wear gloves. And it was for a long time thought he caught a cold, got pneumonia, and died from that. More current researchers think he actually died from typhoid because he didn't show symptoms until 3 weeks later, and that was from the contaminated water that was known to be in the White House at that time and in the systems. So public health and politics always interconnected in D.C. Dr. Davis is buried at Oak Hill Cemetery, like so many of them, with his wife, who died 7 years later, and his daughter, who had died at age 6. So for more stories of our founders, we will be having them as the year goes on, as we celebrate the 160th. But we are also on our AOI 160th campaign to preserve more of our photos, to preserve our records, to digitize them so that our history will not be lost, so DC history will not be lost, no matter what happens with any of the repositories that are around DC. So we are asking you, we thank those of you who have donated, and we ask those of you who might be interested to donate in a category of 160. So $160, triple that, make it $16, $1.60. Anything you would like to give, we are happy to have. As we go forward for our 160th year, preservation will be our key focus for the next year, probably for the next several years to come, but especially with our 160th there. We do have these forms available, and you can also find that online for us. Okay, a couple of announcements of things you might be interested in doing. There are events at the Doctor Bacon House for their bicentennial that they have been celebrating. And on October, oh, that didn't come out very well, did it? Okay, October 30th, there is a Foggy Bottom in the Civil War. And one of our members here, Terry Walsh, who's historian at Doctor Bacon House, is going to be spearheading that. Boy, you really can't see any of that. Sorry about that. But also Frank Leone, who's a member here at AOI, is going to be talking specifically about Foggy Bottom history as well. That is going to be much clearer on their website, as well as on the handout that I have that I will put in the back of the room if you would like to scan the QR code. It's both virtual and in person. So if you can't make it on the evening of October 30th, you can tune in online as well, and to get a hold of that. There is, I think as Cynthia mentioned, a No Kings protest on Saturday. So if you are thinking about going, just be aware it's from, I think, 12 to 2, specifically at Pennsylvania and 3rd. And just as a public service announcement, it is suggested that if you're going to go to that, turn off your phones. Put them in airplane mode, turn them off, or leave them at home. There is data collecting that is going on in many different ways that I don't quite understand and can't explain, but it's happening. So keep that in mind as you are going out and about. Inflatable costumes are not required, but they are suggested. And if that happens, bring a digital camera with you to take pictures for us, please, if you decide that you're going to do that. If you're not going, number one, avoid that area in downtown and Pennsylvania Avenue on Saturday. And think about popping into the Palisades house tour. If you do, you can go say hello to Bill Brown because he will be one of the docents there. And that is also on the 18th from 11 to 4. And that is the 11th annual Palisades. You can go to their website as well. It's palisadesvillage.org for more information and for tickets for that. Lastly, there is a new exhibit at the Georgetown University Library. And it is based on this book, Rhythm of Resistance and Resilience. The book was written by Maurice Jackson, a professor at Georgetown University. And it is looking at how Black Washingtonians used music and sports for the fight for equality. So that is going to be at the library through January. So if you're looking for something to do this weekend or any other through January, you can pop into the library to take a look at that and or check out his book. And this is one of my favorite murals that has been around DC. If you do not know Buck Hill, he was literally what you see. He was a professional jazz musician and a professional postman. So he spent both of those things throughout his career. And you can actually find his music on YouTube as well if you want to check him out before you go through that. Our next lunch is Thursday, November 20th. We will have elections to our board at that point, so it is a full formal meeting. It's our last meeting of 2025, and we will be celebrating our 160th anniversary then. Come for the fellowship, come for the gifts we are going to be giving you, the fun little gifts that you will walk away with, and to talk more about our own history and to celebrate who we are and what we are. If you come, not that you don't all always look nice all the time, but we're going to try to get a group picture. So just be aware of that to especially look good for November since we're going to be taking that picture. And as we know, this organization lasts and lasts. So these could be your great-great-great-grandchildren who are going to look up that picture. So you're going to want to look nice that day. I'm going to turn that over to Nelson for his trivia for today.
Okay, I wanted to get in a little plug first for the planner back there. Mentioned that Eleanor Roosevelt is featured. In 1940, Eleanor Roosevelt testified before the Committee on the District of Columbia in favor of a resolution to amend the Constitution to give us representation in the House of Representatives as though we were a state and to vote in the Electoral College. And that day also, a representative of this organization appeared and testified in favor of the resolution as well. So maybe they met that day. So there's a little bit of history that prompted me to talk about that. I'm going to buy 2 or 3 books, so please do. Anyway, there's been this issue. I just wanted to clarify and get it out of the way. I hope I don't take too much time. About our sisters and brothers in the other organization that was founded about 10 years after this organization for people of color because they weren't welcomed in our organization at the time. That's the way things were operating then, as we all know. So from this day and forevermore, I will refer to the Association of the Oldest Inhabitants, which went by colored for many years, simply as Incorporated. They always had Incorporated after their name. We didn't. It's just AOI Incorporated, and we're AOI. By 1960, AOI Incorporated was debating changing its name to the Association of the Oldest Citizens of the District of Columbia or the Oldest Settlers of the District of Columbia. They debated that for a number of years, but apparently it never happened. At a meeting of AOI Incorporated held in 1916, it was announced that a member, Sergeant Major Christian A. Fleetwood, had recently passed away. He was a person of color, of course, could not join this organization. Fleetwood was the only African-American resident to be awarded the Congressional Medal of Honor. His picture is back there in a little biography. I'm going to have more on him next month because next month's a veterans. A lot of celebrations go on about veterans. He was awarded that for his service as a Union soldier in the Civil War and in 2 battles for bravery. So my trivia question is, or nugget of knowledge question, we like to call it, how many African American Union soldiers received this award, the Medal of Honor, for service in the Civil War? I'll give you a clue. Now the rule is, if you've won before, let's have somebody else win. That's rule number 1. 2, raise your hand. Don't shout out the answers. And I'll call on people. The clue is it's between 10 and 20. Do we have any takers here? Well, no, little more than that. No, a little less than that. What's in between? Somebody in between get it? There you go. I guess we have to give it to you. It was 15. Okay? I don't know how many of you are familiar with the Early Recollections of Washington City by Christian Hines. This was reprinted about 40 years ago by the Junior League of Washington, D.C. Are they still functioning? Does anybody know? I hope they are, yeah. And I recommend this. I'd like to get some copies and maybe give them out as prizes here. It's very interesting. He was born in this area, moved to Washington as an infant, settling in Georgetown with his family. He was born in 1781. He died 10 years after AOI was founded in 65. So he could have been he joined a member. I don't know if he got in or not. But his recollections were published in 1866, 1 year after this organization. And it was edited by John Claggett Proctor I. And of course, there was a John Claggett Proctor II. It didn't go by Junior. And we know him. He wrote the Rambler column for many years for the Washington Star. Was connected with this organization. So AOI was connected in some way. The AOI, John Claggett I was a journalist here for many years and got into other professions as well. And I recommend reading this. I just read it for the 3rd time the other night. I was able to actually get through it. It's about 70 pages without falling asleep. So, so it's very interesting. But he talks about a lot of the things that were going on the first 20 years of the city, from approximately 1800 to 1820. And in the middle of it, of course, was the British invasion. He talks about that and what happened to the city then. But there are a couple of little things I just wanted to mention. He mentions that in 1802, Mr. McGurk, a bricklayer, came home drunk and beat his wife to death. And she was carrying 2 children who were then stillborn, so he actually killed 3 people. He was tried, as jury of his peers, and convicted, and they recommended death. We had the death penalty here then. And he was hanged down in front of the Capitol. The gallows was built. He talks a lot about that, Christian Hines, the building of it, and how everybody turned out. It was a big event. And of course, we didn't have the last capital punishment here was 1957 by electric chair. Haven't had any since. But stay tuned. It may be capital punishment may be coming back. A little footnote: Marion Barry was a lifelong advocate for capital punishment. A lot of people don't know that. The one I really like is he talks about the election of 1800. People here could vote in the presidential election in 1800 because we were still part of Maryland until 1801. And there was a polling place in Georgetown. There were about 300 white male property owners who were eligible to vote. Turnout was very big. And it turned out to be a very riotous day. There was a lot of drinking and fighting. Police had to be called in, so there were turbulent elections. We had one recently, didn't we? Anyway, the polling place was in a tavern. Can anybody? So you know what happened there. So can anybody name the tavern, the famous tavern in Georgia? Who got it? Somebody. Somebody got it back. You won last week. Yeah. By default, you won last week. No. I thought somebody said it back here. I wanted them to hold their hands up. I'm sorry, I can't hear it. I've heard it say it over here. I thought I heard it properly. Did somebody say it over here? Martin's Tavern? Oh, no. Well, it's 1933. They're going to have a 100th anniversary coming up. I hope I'm around for the anniversary of Martin's Tavern. Oh, come on. The famous tavern. Souter, you've got it. Okay, Souter's Tavern. A lot of important events happen. I wonder does anybody know if there's a marker at Souter's Tavern? Because he identifies quite closely where it was located on what was then High Street, which is now, of course, Wisconsin Avenue. Does anybody know if there's a historic marker there? I'm going to look into it. Maybe we should get behind having a historic marker put there. I wanted to, back there is information about Fleetwood. He had a daughter who died. He had no descendants. She didn't marry or have any children. I'm trying to track down what happened to his Medal of Honor. Where it happened to it, I don't know. It should be on display somewhere in the city. And so I'm trying to find out I don't know if I'll ever be able to track it down. And there's also information back there about the 688th Battalion. It was a unit of African American women who were sent to Europe to get the mail straightened out. I don't know if you read about it. And they really accomplished this. The mail system for getting letters from GIs to their home and back and forth was just not working. They were able in a year to get it done. And there's a drive on to get a stamp issued in their honor. And there's a petition going around. There's information about it back there. You can sign the petition. It's online. There's information about it back there. So if you might want to be interested in that, I might get the AOI to write a letter about it. Go ahead. There's a group of, I'll just mention quickly, there's a group of veterans that are trying to, we found his grave, the family grave in a small cemetery up in Northwest, and we're looking into maybe cleaning up his grave area and having maybe a ceremony out there sometime at his birthday or one of the veterans' celebration days, and honoring him some more and getting some more information about him. He had quite an interesting life here in the city for over 50 years. Thank you. Okay.
But yes. On November 11th, they'll be reopening? Sure. And I do think we had Frank Smith from the African American Civil War Museum did give a talk to AOI. So if you want to prep for that, I think that's going to be reopening. That's you said it's going to be reopening on November 11th? A celebration of Civil War veterans, African American Civil War veterans in D.C. on November 11th. The 6888 is on Netflix. If you didn't hear that, we're talking about the films. For more information about AOI and AOI Inc., there is the video of the talk that Bill Brown and Sherry Sewell gave us about the connection between those two organizations, and that is on our YouTube channel. And I want to thank Nelson for the reminder of how important words are and names are, and that they can be used to be inclusive as well as exclusive. So thank you for that as we talk about AOI Inc. To our speaker today, which we're excited about, we have Dr. Mary Beth Corrigan with us today. She holds a PhD and a CA and is the librarian for collections on slavery, memory, and reconciliation in the Booth Family Center for Special Collections at Luncheon Library at Georgetown University. She has helped assess its manuscript and archival collections to prepare for the digitization of the documentation of Jesuit enslavement. In addition to supporting projects that improve collections access for scholars, she works on educational programs with Georgetown faculty, descendants of those enslaved by the Jesuits, and community historians. For most of her career, she has worked independently as a contractor with the National Endowment for the Arts, National Endowment for the Humanities, Riggs Bank, and its successor, PNC, as well as the AFL-CIO. She has deep and extensive ties with the DC historical community. She was curator of research collections at the Historical Society of Washington from 1994 to 1995 and served on its board from 2008 to 2014. She is also the founding co-chair of the Friends of DC Archives, one of the causes that are very near and dear for AOI. She also served as a consultant for several historic house museums, but most especially Tudor Place in Georgetown, where she researched the lives of the people who were enslaved at that site. Mary Beth has kindly agreed to leave a little bit of time for questions. So at that point, if you want to raise your hand, we will bring the mic to you. And if you could please let us know who you are and then ask your questions, we will appreciate that. Thank you for being with us, Mary Beth, and I turn it over to her. Welcome.
First of all, thank you so much for that really kind introduction, and really thank you for promoting the exhibition that's at Luncheon Library. It was really a pleasure to help bring Maurice's book into an exhibit form. When Bill asked me, and what's happened here? No, it's okay. Yeah, it was there. Without my slideshow, I don't know. Oh, there it is. Okay. When Bill asked me to give this talk, he asked me to reflect on my career as a historian of the District of Columbia. And really, I think he was referring to reflecting on my past 30 years of practice. I'm not sure if any of you are prepared for what I'm about to talk about, because first of all, the title really doesn't reflect what I'm about to talk about. I always have a practice of creating my titles after I finish whatever I'm working on, and in this case, that would have been helpful. But this is really a talk about my own personal journey and how I see at least part of my career folding out. I don't know if any of you have had a chance to look at this video that's promoting the America 250 Civics Education Coalition. It is a 1 minute and 35-second video, and I wouldn't blame any of you if you had missed it. And I'm not going to try to play it for you. It's actually a video that should come with a warning label. It opens saying, American education was once a shining light. Then the next slide, but over the past 60 or 70 years, that brilliance has been dimmed. I personally took that personally because, for one thing, I value my secular education, but the other reason too is that from basically it's describing my lifetime, and it's also criticizing a narrative of history that I have benefited from learning from, and that I have really worked to contribute towards. So essentially, this is actually something that I take very personally. Students at Georgetown often ask me where my interest in Black history began. And in actuality, it probably started in 1978 or 1979 when I did an independent study looking at the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Summer in 1964. And just in context, I was, white from New York, and I didn't understand that that Black people could not vote in the South up until 1965. And this movement essentially was extremely important in creating the Voting Rights Act of 1965, and also as a prelude to the student movement of the 1960s. And I was intrigued by the Mississippi Freedom Schools. In 1964, white student activists working with SNCC began to teach in the Freedom Schools. These schools were for young Black children, and they taught young Black children Black history, subjects that community organizers throughout the Civil Rights Movement had been teaching on a community level throughout the South. So I began to really wonder, what were they teaching? And then how did they generate this history? And how was this history preserved? So in answer to the first question, what were they teaching? The path to finding out more about this subject was fairly easy to me. I could study history. I could stay in school for a really long time, and that's exactly what I did. And I became a student of the newly emerging field of African American history. So, but the question of how they constructed their stories and preserved their stories was a little harder for me to get at. And I have to admit, after all these years, I finally have some sense of an answer. And essentially what it is that families tell these stories to each other. They preserve the sources within their families. And also they share it within their communities as much as they can. And they try to teach their children it. So family history, to at least a great extent, maybe even more than academic history, is responsible for what we now call woke history. And in 1979, I was really hardly a trendsetter. I was part of, a culture that had begun in the late 1960s. Among academic historians who influenced my high school teachers, by the way, they began to emphasize history from below. And a canon of that was Towards a New Past, which was a compilation of essays by historians of influence in this period: Christopher Lasch, Eugene Genovese, Jesse Lamish. And essentially, these were historians that posited that it was important to understand history from below, that the people that we needed to study were the women, the Black people, the working class people, the marginalized people who did not appear in the standard histories that we were taught in our textbooks. So this new social history also prompted academic historians to really begin to engage in social history. You know, many of the people I just listed, especially Stephen Thurstrup, were tried to look at things at a micro level. Also at the same time as Alex Haley published Roots in 1976, which was the culmination of 12 years of research into his family history. Most of us had seen it as an 8-part miniseries that aired in January 1977 and brought to our consciousness people like LeVar Burton, Louis Gossett Jr., John Amos. It was directly connected to a surge in interest in genealogy, particularly among Black people. Black people could begin to see their own family history in the history of the United States. At that time, the Afro-American Historical and Genealogical Society was founded, and it's really difficult to understate the impact of what this means, because for Black people who had trouble reconstituting their families after slavery, it basically gave them a way to connect to the extensive networks that had been lost. So you began to see, Black reunions. They became commonplace during the period after Roots. When I was in graduate school, though, I spent an inordinate amount of time in this space here, which many of you may recognize as the microfilm reading room at the National Archives. I could not find an image of what it looked like when I was there in the late 1980s and early 1990s, but it didn't look too dissimilar from this. Those readers were old by 1990, I can tell you that. I got a part-time job where I was helping genealogical researchers. I was helping them use ship passenger lists to understand the immigration of their family. Descendants of Confederate and Union soldiers I was helping with. But I also happened to help a lot of Black genealogists, and I really came to understand how the difficulties of doing Black genealogy, and I understood what the 1870 brick wall was, because so many people could not get past the 1870 census to learn more about their ancestors, since enslaved people were not recorded in the census and they were not recorded in any public records. But I also became intrigued by the methods of genealogy. As I was developing my approach to my dissertation research, I came to appreciate the value of the census especially. By 1989, I had settled upon researching the Black family in the District of Columbia before the Civil War. My dissertation, A Social Union of Heart and Effort, the African American Family on the Eve of Emancipation, was completed in 1996 at the University of Maryland. It was an academic family history. It centered upon the question of how Black family members organized themselves to make a living and to sustain themselves. It looked at the separations of family in the District of Columbia because of the slave trade, but it also really tried to account for how both Black and enslaved people formed families together, created communities, and really tried to eke out a living. It included computational analysis derived from the census, the published census, but also the manuscript census as well. And I also used the census to identify individual families to illustrate points that I wanted to make. As I did my own research, though, I really came to appreciate the work of genealogists, and specifically Black genealogists. Because as I was doing my research, if I found that I couldn't trace backwards for somebody, or if I couldn't make the connections I wanted to through the records, I could just drop it, because I could move on to another example and try to create another story. So I really came to appreciate the work of Black genealogists who had showed far greater persistence than I did, and often better understanding of how the records worked than I did. Also, when I was working on my dissertation, I took my first professional job at the Historical Society of Washington. At the time, it had just changed its name from the Columbia Historical Society. One of the things that I had to do while I was working there was to create kind of a short history of the Historical Society for grants to show what its purpose was and where it was in its history. And the year 1977 did not seem that far away as I was writing these grant applications. In 1977, the Historical Society opened up its membership. At that time, you no longer had to apply to become a member of the Historical Society, and it was really trying by the late 1980s to become a place that was not known for being a place for elites to come together to discuss their history. It was really trying to change that. And it had made some inroads with the George Washington University History Department, and also too with the people engaged with Washington history for planning purposes and to begin and to work on preservation grants. But I also should say, I mean, first of all, the Historical Society had a long way to go at that point in terms of earning trust of the Black community. But I also should say that I had trouble too. And almost anyone who works in DC history has to be able to work in concert with community historians. And in my case, I can think of Sister Maida Angel at the Georgetown Visitation, Maria Goodwin, who had written a book called The Guide to Black Washington in 1990. They really provided essential guidance to my work. And there were other people, but those two people really come to mind. They pointed to sources, and in some cases they explained the significance of some of the sites that they had come to learn. But I also got a chilly reception. The records at Mount Zion were never included in my dissertation. I was able to gain some insight into Mount Zion through publications that the parishioners there had done. And some of what ended up happening is that some of the publications that came out of my dissertation helped to break down some of the walls. I contributed to the Journal of African American Genealogical Historical Society. This is the publication of the James Dent Walker chapter, which is focused on Washington, D.C. I compiled an index of the enslaved people listed in the records of the commissioners who were reviewing compensation at the time of emancipation in 1862. At the time, the only way to access that was through the names of enslavers, so I contributed that to the journal. I also wrote an article for Washington History that used the baptismal records of Holy Trinity Church, but probably the main breakthrough came when I wrote an article called Imaginary Cruelties. In 2000, it appeared in the 2001-2002 winter issue of the Washington History. This article really explored how the slave trade in the District of Columbia worked. And I was motivated to write it in large part because an editor of my work for a previous publication had told me that the slave trade had very little consequence in the District of Columbia, which was simply, I see the reaction here, which is simply wrong. And so I wrote an article really to show that how in the framework of laws related to manumission and all of the impediments to the slave trade between people in Virginia and Maryland and the District of Columbia did not mitigate the slave trade in the District of Columbia. And in fact, the District of Columbia was the place that had the most active slave depot. And by slave depot, I mean there were numerous holding pens where people were held before they were actually transported to the South. Some of these people were transported by land, but we know most of them probably were transported through Alexandria. So it's impossible to deny this role. And I have to say that opened doors for me. It led directly to the role I had at Tudor Place in terms of researching the lives of enslaved people there. But probably most importantly, I have never, ever, ever heard again somebody tell me that the slave trade was inconsequential in the District of Columbia. So, where am I? And I should say, as I was doing this work, community historians were doing good work to bring to light stories of their families and bringing out the stories of their families to create important works. I mean, one of the great examples during the early years of my career is the Black Georgetown Remembered, which really was published by Georgetown University as a way of essentially including black people into the story of the bicentennial that Georgetown was celebrating at that time. It was edited by, it was put together by Carol Gibbs, Valerie Babb, who was on faculty at Georgetown, and Kathleen Lesko. And it featured a number of oral histories of people who had been displaced as a result of the restoration movement in Georgetown. Cultural tourism had begun to do its work in the mid-1990s, and they were using family sources of people that they were identified in the neighborhood. Linda Kakinos, it was after the early mid-1990s, has contributed some of her family sources into the cultural tourism markers, and I'm sure there are probably other people here who've contributed to them as well. You can scan any of the DC Historical Studies conferences, and you can see the work of people who were telling the stories of their own families in the District of Columbia. All of this is important because, as we know, people don't think of the District of Columbia as a place where people live. And so this helps to establish the idea that people lived here and that there's a culture here and that there's work here. And I'm about to enter into what's going to seem like a digression, because between 1998 and 2000, I began to work on a project that was sponsored by the National Endowment of the Humanities called My History is America's History. This is really a point where the NEH began to say to themselves, oh, we've got the internet, and people can begin to share their stories across the internet. And it's possible for people to share their stories and make connections outside of their localities. And it was an unusual initiative for NEH. And I should say that this project began in 1998 through 2000. And it was at a period that was right after a series of rifts, which really seemed to decimate the National Endowment for the Humanities at that time. In 1996, its budget was $109.9 million, a decrease from the previous year, which had been set at $172 million. And I just should say parenthetically, I checked the 2024 budget for the National Endowment for the Humanities. It was $207 million. In using the CPI in 1996 dollars, that would have been $222 million. So in fact, it was not much different than what we had come to live with. The biggest impetus for this was PSINet, which I had to look this up because I didn't even remember what it was. It was a company that was developed to basically become a site for commerce. They were looking to become a site for businesses, a hosting site, you know. And so funding came from PSINet, as well as genealogy.com was a supporter of this. It was not connected to any funding initiatives. In other words, this is really kind of off mission. I learned later that NEH was not planning on following up with grants to encourage people to do family histories and the community organizations that helped them. There was nothing like that doing. They did produce this guidebook, which the cover is right there. And it consisted of basically recommendations as to how people could get into family history themselves. The people were selected because of the methods that they used. We tried to make sure that there was geographic and ethnic diversity. And I had to identify the people who would be featured in it. That was my role. So I talked to about 20 to 25 different family historians who were really active in this, who were known within their communities as doing good work that made connections with the histories of their communities. So I relied a lot on local historical organizations, some state organizations, some community organizations. And one of the things that you find is that this work really does reflect the idea of history from below in the public arena. The project does bring out the diversity of the people engaged in family history at this point. We featured, Navajo families, Mormons, Italian Americans, a Black Freedman Choctaw family was featured. Somebody who descended from one of the Spanish missionaries was featured. It was a troubled project, though, I'd say, from the very beginning. I mentioned how it was off mission for the National Endowment for the Humanities, so that was part of it. But one of the reasons I was effective in working in this project was I was the only person on the project that had any experience at all in dealing with the genealogists or the family historians. And the relationship that it was trying to encourage was to get people interested in genealogy to use the work of academic historians. In many cases, they already were, but they thought of the information as the genealogists needed help from the academics, rather than it being a circular reciprocal relationship. Also, PSINet itself went out of business by 2002, so the site itself was very short-lived. And basically, it had the limitations that a lot of predominantly white institutions have, in that they're not sharing with the activities of the Black communities and other local communities that were doing this history. So my history project also had, the ambition of documenting the work of these family historians. So they created this portal. And you could already see there that this is from the Wayback Machine, so the formatting is probably a little off, but it gives you instructions as to how you're supposed to index your family history and what you're supposed to write in there. And and essentially what happened is very, very few people submitted their stories. And it's not that people didn't look at the site, it's just that it created a lot of work to do so. But the other bigger problem with it is that the timing of it was really off. People had already begun to use listservs and genealogical historical societies and their websites to begin to share information. Ancestry had launched around the time of this project. Ancestry started in 1996. And by 2003, it had already completed the digitization of the census. So people were already going to that paid site to do their history, to do their histories. And it was the beginning of what I would say our current state of doing family history is. Alondra Nelson wrote a book in 2016 that essentially looks at the importance of DNA studies in genealogy, because it opened up the field it just made it so much more inclusive. And for Black families in particular, it enabled them to trace their origins to plantations in the South or places in the South, but also directly to Africa. So, and they were using 23andMe, which was launched in 2006. And by 2012, Ancestry had begun its own Ancestry DNA. So, as Alondra Nelson says, it's being used as a catalyst for reconciliation, to restore lineages, families, and knowledge of the past, to make political claims in the present. So how am I doing for time? Okay. Because essentially, this is the context that Georgetown began to face its history in. In 2014, this is from an address that President Jack DeGioia gave at Georgetown in 2016. When he said there is a disconnect between what is known and what is alive in a way which we understand ourselves, our history, and our university. And he got to that point because in 2014, a group of students had begun to look into the history of Georgetown and were horrified to find out that the Jesuits of Maryland had sold, at the time the number was listed as 272, and we know now that the number is closer to 314 or 315 people, to essentially allay the debts of the university and to expand Jesuit education and Jesuit missions in the United States. So the students were at the time, they knew that the old Jesuit residence, and when I was at school, because I went to Georgetown, right? When I was at school, we called it the old Jesuit residence, and had been named for Thomas Milady, who was the architect of this cell. And the students began, as they became aware of this history, they began to protest it. And the protests attracted the attention of not just within the university, but outside the university. An alumnus named Richard Cellini essentially went and he hired some genealogists because he was suspicious of a story that the Jesuits had been telling themselves for years. The Jesuits were well aware of their own history. It's something they talked about. I mean, there's evidence of them talking about it throughout the entire 20th century. And it was included in the official bicentennial history of Georgetown. And essentially, this alumnus, Richard Cellini, didn't buy the story that all of the people who were sold had passed away or died as a result of the typhoid fever epidemic in Louisiana in the early 1850s. So he hired a couple of genealogists to begin to look into this and to see if he could identify descendants of the people who were sold. And I have to say that this was actually not very hard for him to identify people who were descendant of the people who were sold. And what the biggest reason this was not hard is because there were people in Louisiana who had been doing this work and knew about this story from the point of view of their family history. So it was not hard for, and the professional genealogists did work, they did identify people, but it was not hard for the professional genealogists to identify people who had already done this work. So he began this work in late 2015. By April 2016, Rachel Swarns of the New York Times had written a story about the descendants of the people enslaved by Georgetown, asking them what was owed to the people there. And so it was really as the university was doing this work and beginning to arrange some community meetings themselves, and again, not thinking about the descendants of the people whose families were harmed by this. And so the university was caught in this position. And essentially in 2016, the president of the university accepted the working group report of a group of faculty, students, and staff. And this report basically addressed what the university needed to do to preserve this history and to make sure it was never forgotten. And also to begin to think about memorialization. But again, the views of the descendants were not included in this report at all. And right here, Joseph Stewart, a GU 272 descendant, asks for inclusion in the Slavery Memory Reconciliation Initiative. This was a moment after President DeGioia gave his address saying the history had not been alive until now. So, and I should say that it's been, it hasn't been comfortable for the university to deal with this. I mean, first of all, this was publicly on display that they had neglected the descendants of the people enslaved by the Jesuits. But almost immediately, Georgetown faculty began to include descendants in their teaching. One of the descendants, Melisande Short Colomb, attended Georgetown for a couple of years. She was 64 at the time she was there. She has created a one-woman play called Here I Am that has been performed several times in this area, and she's traveled with it. There's a documentary on her experience at Georgetown. There are several students who are descendants of the people from the GU 272 who attend school now, but she took it upon herself to be the public face of it. Also descendants, and I would say they were led by Joseph Stewart, a group of descendants called the GU 272 descendants, have played a critical role in pushing the Jesuits. They petitioned the Jesuit general in Rome, to ask him to essentially intervene and ask the Jesuits to take responsibility for what they've done. So with the Jesuits, they formed an organization called the Descendants Truth and Reconciliation Fund. And they are essentially charged with making grants to educational associations and organizations in the places affected by Jesuit slavery. This includes especially Louisiana, but also includes St. Louis and Southern Maryland. And truthfully, if they began to look, and they're aware that this also includes Baltimore and Philadelphia. I mean, there's so many places. The work for that is really just beginning. What I want to also say is that I really acknowledge the fact that I am speaking to a group of people whose history is very much entwined with a lot of the cultural the culture I'm talking about, the cultural shifts I'm talking about. When I started working, at the Historical Society, I thought of the AOI as a group of stuffy elites that we were going to have to distance ourselves from. But by the mid-1990s, the AOI, under the leadership of Phil Ogilvie, Nelson Rimensnyder, right? I'm not even sure if I could pronounce your name correctly. Bill Brown. Okay. Bill Brown, all of you have become such an effective advocate for the institutions that are preserving Washington history, especially the DC Archives and the Historical Society of Washington. So for that, we have to be grateful. And I also am very aware that within the past couple of years, Sherry Sewall has brought her family's story to this group, and it has now become part of your story. All of this shows the transformative power of the stories of our families and ways that we can begin to connect and change. And also to accept the diversity in our community organizations. I think one of the ways that Georgetown's reconciliation process has worked well, and I could say this almost 10 years after this report was publicly issued, is that I believe that we've become comfortable with the fact that people are writing about this and establishing oral history projects that they're not being donated to us. There's repositories in Louisiana that are taking these oral histories, that this story really doesn't belong to us. And most of the tellers of this history have no connection to Georgetown. Rachel Swarn's book, The GU 272, is written in criticism of Georgetown as animating her as much as possible. The other thing, too, I just want to point out is that, and I have a slide for this, and it's only occurring to me now, is that there's a conference of an organization called Catholic Religious Organization Studying Slavery. It's parallel to the University Studying Slavery, and I'm not sure if any of you are aware of what the University Studying Slavery is. But the Catholic Religious Organization Studying Slavery is having its biannual meeting at Georgetown on November 12th and 13th. I'm presenting in it, so I can remember the date. But all of you, there is a registration fee of $99, but there are portions of it that are open. Rachel Swarns is delivering a keynote address in Gaston Hall on Georgetown's campus on the evening of November 12th. And I can give Cindy and Bill or whoever wants information to pass it on to you. But I encourage people to consider coming. So anyway, thank you, and I'm ready for questions.
I'm Carol Kane. Thank you. Did you find that this was more rampant in Catholic universities? My daughter attended Loyola, and there was a fair amount of it at Loyola as well. Did you find it in any other universities like state schools, or was it mostly Catholic?
Well, that's a complicated question. I mean, first of all, Loyola, you're talking about Loyola Baltimore, right? Okay, Loyola is a Jesuit college. I'm sorry. Oh, to repeat the question, I'm sorry. She was asking if the history of enslavement is more common among Catholic universities than it is among other more secular universities. The history is different. What I would say is that Georgetown was founded in 1789, and it pursued this sale in 1838, really at a time when enslavers in this region were selling people at a very high rate. So it's connected with this large mass sale. One of the probably the largest mass sale that's been documented. And Loyola Baltimore was actually founded as part of the expansion of the Jesuit order. So, and there is documentation, forget what year, 1857, 58, that actually mentions that funding for the school is coming out of the payment. There was a payment plan that lasted 20, 25 years that came directly out of that payment. And Loyola Baltimore has really taken very, very seriously their responsibility. And Loyola Baltimore, in many ways, is a model for how you can begin to engage with descendants from the very beginning of the project. Because they brought in descendants from the very beginning and had students write histories and their reflections on Loyola's, and not just their history related to enslavement, but also to segregation. There are other schools that are dealing with this issue, Brown and Harvard, but they are connected to the Atlantic slave trade. So Georgetown is, the distinctive thing about Georgetown is that we have the names of the people involved. We have a record of people and their surnames. And so for that reason, Georgetown's distinctive. But University of Virginia is definitely intertwined with this. So I would not say it's necessarily Catholic, but it's and to DePaul University. So it's not even just Jesuit, the Vincentians, and there are a lot of the monastic orders are beginning to look into this. And I should say that these are women religious orders are beginning to look into these histories.
I have a question over here. My name is Tim Hannibal, and I was lucky enough to present a project that I helped Barbara Torrey and Tiggy Green, Between Freedom and Equality, their book that was published by the Georgetown University Press. And one thing that was amazing about their research, they had done extensive research of George Poynter, the ancestor who helped build George Washington's Potomac Canal. And their research kind of got this jolt when you talked about the power of the internet. And this is to my question. They were researching George Poynter's descendants backwards, forwards. And the descendant, James Fisher, my dear friend now deceased, and his partner Tanya were researching it backwards. And Tanya, you talk about an incredible black genealogist who just started with her own family and branched out. When she and James met, he said, I don't have anybody in my family. And she said, well, just give me the names of your 4 grandparents. And what happened, they were on they were on Ancestry.com.
Yeah.
Tanya had constructed a family tree, and Tiggy discovered it. Tanya and James were working backwards, they were working forwards, and it took their research into a whole new place. Living history, black family reunions, and culminating really in the presentation that James and I did here 2 years ago. What I titled, you talk about your title, How an Untold Story Became a Movement for Reconciliation. So I guess my question is, when I think about the power of the internet and the power of that Ancestry.com site, I think of so much good with it. But I do know, and this is my question, I know it's associated with the Mormon Church. Are there downsides associated with that kind of research? Thank you.
Yes, I do think there are. I mean, the principal one being a question of privacy. And the reality is that as companies get sold, the data could be used very differently. I'm not an expert on this. There's a woman I work with a lot, Sharon Leon, who's now the director of Omeka, and she really sounds the alarm on this. And that's the primary downside. What I will say about it is that it's changed my work significantly. Because when I was working at the National Archives, and any of the work I ever did after that, whenever I met somebody who was interested in researching their family into the 19th century, I'd always tell them, well, look at your family sources, look at the Bible, talk to people who have memories. And as soon as I started working at Georgetown, I met people who found their ancestry through DNA. And so they were able to come to me directly saying, I know my ancestor is on this, in these documents related to the sale. And I have to say, when that started to happen, it kind of blew my mind. Yeah, and the other side of that too is that we have a project now where we've been digitizing the records of it's called the Maryland Province Archives, which is a central group of Jesuit records, and we've been digitizing papers of individual priests, and we're at the point now where we finished almost anything dated before 1900. The thing that's really interesting to me is that the demand for the early 20th century and mid 20th century records has really lagged behind. And, I'd have to say 20 years ago, it would have been reversed. So essentially, it's changed the work a lot. And the pointers are great. I mean, they're great. I mean, that work is really exemplary. So, yeah.
Hi, Judson French, and thank you so much. This has been educational and eye-opening. Very much appreciate your efforts. Did I understand correctly? The focus here has been in the GU 272, but I thought I heard you say that this has potentially been expanded to 314. Did I understand that correctly?
Yeah. There's essentially the number GU 272 comes from a document that was created as the Jesuits were planning the sale. And it was not a final document in that you can actually see notes that people had run away. In some cases, people were retained and left behind. One of the descendants organizations, in fact, this was the organization founded by Richard Cellini, the Georgetown alum, called the Georgetown Memory Project, has researched this much further. And they've established that the number is closer to 314. The list that was used to create, for the number GU 272, and it's a great moniker, GU 272, there was definitely an undercount of children. So the majority of the people who were transported to Louisiana were under the age of 15. So, and several of them, the Jesuits were instructed to keep married couples together, but they did separate parents and children, which is, honestly, from everything I know when I was doing my dissertation, it was like the reverse. People tried to preserve the parent-child ties. That was probably more important as they were making whatever choices they could. So it's really mind-blowing and mind-boggling. And I have to admit, as somebody who has talked about this a lot and talks about slavery a lot, I realize that there's kind of a professional hazard, right? 'Cause, I talk about these things so flippantly. But, the majority of the people who were transported to Louisiana were children.
Hello. So sitting here, it seems so obvious that you would include the descendants. Can you say a little more about what the context was, or what were the dynamics that they were not included in that report?
You mean the 314, the number wasn't correct?
No, I'm talking about the report that came out, and there was no inclusion of descendants.
Oh, it was a gigantic blind spot, and it comes from culture within academia that we are here to educate you. You know, we're the people here to study it. You know, and I still encounter it, but, you know, they've also learned to adjust to the fact that there are people out there doing research who are learning things and have a perspective on this that is very different than, you know, academic work. I mean, I tried to, I know when I did my own dissertation research, it was an academic study. I was modeling my work after Tamara Raven and Virginia Lons McLaughlin, which are names that mean nothing to you, right? Nothing to you. But they were using their sources, and they were making, you know, they were making conclusions about family structure based upon the census and the like. It honestly, I did work with community historians because I knew they could give me access to sources, but I didn't think of their, you know, it never occurred to me while I was doing my own research that there might be descendants. And it was only after I finished and I thought about how I might revise it if I ever did, that I realized that I probably should look at descendants. So it's a big blind spot. And it's something that, you know, and at NEH, the relationship was that the academics are going to help genealogists situate their stories better, whereas the reality is that genealogists have to learn a lot about the history as they're doing their work.
We have time for one more question, and then maybe you can stay afterwards.
Yeah.
Mary, good afternoon. Mary Beth Carl Cole here, and it's good to see you again. I remember you from my days at the Historical Society and serving with Kip on the board. So
okay.
I remember you well. How deep did you dig into the records of the Baltimore Archdiocese with respect to its relationship to the construction of Georgetown? Because what most people don't realize is that the Baltimore Archdiocese was Catholicism in America. It was the only archdiocese that existed for a number of years. Washington did not get its own archdiocese until 1948. The other question is that in your research, did you run across a gentleman by the name of Benjamin Bowling Wills, B.B. Wills?
I can answer your second question quickly. The answer to that question is no, I don't recall ever seeing the name Benjamin Bowling Wills. Yeah.
There's a reason I ask, because Benjamin Bowling was greatly connected to the Jesuits here and a lot of the shenanigans that went on. And this happened well into the 60s, where he and the Jesuits were conspiring, starting back in the early 1900s, of acquiring land along St. Indigo's in Maryland. As a matter of fact, Benjamin Bowling is buried on the hillside there. And he too was tied into a lot of the efforts with Georgetown in the 19th century.
Well,
was quite a prominent guy in all of this.
I'd like to talk to you about this afterwards. But in answer to your question about Baltimore, first of all, the researchers at Loyola Baltimore researched directly the relationship between Georgetown's sale and funding Loyola College Baltimore. Certainly, we are aware of the connections between the foundation of the Archdiocese of Baltimore and the founding of Georgetown University, because John Carroll was such an instrumental figure in doing both things. And there was certainly a history of actually contention between the Archdiocese of Baltimore and the Maryland province of the Society of Jesus, and to some extent Georgetown, but not. They all had different ideas of what Georgetown should be in the early 19th century. But in answer to your question, that there are definitely sources that address the connection between the Archdiocese of Baltimore and enslavement. But to this point, no one has systematically gone through it and tried to make those connections that I know of. They have not been at least personally approaching me. One of the great things about digitization is people can do their work on their own. So occasionally you hear of a work that's like, oh, that's really great. Somebody's doing that. But I don't know of anybody doing that work. And there are so many questions and angles. And one of the things I should probably mentioned is that, more and more, especially because of the student interest in Washington, D.C., we're looking at, and we're being asked constantly to look at Georgetown's relationship to Washington, D.C. And that work is ongoing and taking place. And it's not connected to our resources directly, although certainly aspects of our resources do address those questions. Sure.
Well, I know that Dr. Corrigan will stay here a little bit if you do have questions. She has offered that. But as per our tradition, I would like to offer her our thanks for coming to talk to us and educate us today about this. And I'd also like to give you one more connection, is that the Dr. Davis that I was talking about earlier graduated from Georgetown University.
Okay.
So the connection between the city and the university is ongoing, as
Thank
we
you.
learn. Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. And thank you so much for your questions. And I know that we'll be looking for ways that we can support your work and support this connection to this kind of living history and family history. And one of the ways that you can do that for us is to fill out the family history forms that we have on the AOI website. So if you haven't taken a look at them, please do so. We would love to collect that before that too is lost. Hopefully we'll see you in November. Don't forget that you still have the planners that are for sale in the back.